Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Today, we're exploring a city that just keeps reinventing itself. Like a phoenix, but one that also really holds on to its past. We are talking, of course, about Tokyo, an absolutely incredible place. And for this exploration, we've really dug into some great sources, a brief history of Tokyo, plus a whole lot of related research. Our aim: to pull out the key insights, really give you a shortcut to understanding this amazing urban giant.
Exactly. And our mission today is really understanding that transformation. How Tokyo went from this, well, humble fishing village to one of the biggest, most economically powerful cities anywhere on Earth. And what's really fascinating, I think, is how Tokyo's story, unique as it is, kind of offers these universal lessons about cities, about growth and resilience, lessons that apply everywhere.
Okay, let's unpack that. How did this place, originally just a small fishing village called Edo back in the 12th century, how did it get so important? It's almost hard to picture it starting so small.
It is quite a story. I mean, founded early 12th century, yes. But the real game changer was Tokugawa Ieyasu. He chose Edo as his base of power in 1603. A really strategic move. And that decision, it kicked off Japan's long era of feudal military rule and that famous period of isolationism right up until 1868. Interestingly, his path was sort of cleared by Toyotomi Hideyoshi's coastal siege in 1590. That took out some key rivals.
Ah, okay. So the stage was set for Ieyasu.
Right, and once he got there, he put massive effort into developing this, well, pretty undeveloped area where the Edo and Sumida rivers met. We're talking a deep moat, huge earthen embankments, lots of wooden structures, serious construction. And his descendants, especially the third shogun, Iemitsu, they just kept rebuilding, kept expanding the castle. It eventually became the largest in the whole country.
Wow.
Yeah. And politically, it was complex. The shogunate was always struggling to keep control over the regional lords, the daimyo. They actually forced the daimyo to live in Edo part-time, use it as their base.
So that pulled power towards Edo.
Exactly. It effectively shifted Japan's political center right there. And that, in turn, fueled the growth of good markets, shop and selling perishable goods popping up in all those winding alleys. A real city taking shape.
So not just a physical change, but a fundamental shift. A new power center bustling with activity. But that kind of early growth, it usually comes with problems, right?
Oh, absolutely. It wasn't all smooth sailing. There were
Okay.
definitely growing pains. You had the Genroku earthquake in 1703, then a huge fire in 1704. Those events really highlighted how vulnerable the city was. It actually led to major river repairs, sort of early attempts at disaster planning, you could say.
Right. Okay, so that brings us to another huge moment. The Meiji Restoration in 1868. This sounds like a massive turning point. What changed, and why the name changed to Tokyo?
Massive is the right word. The Meiji Restoration brought, revolutionary changes. Politically, economically, socially, everything. It basically ended the shogunate, that whole military rule system. Power went back to the emperor, the Meiji emperor. And they formed a new democratic government, looking west for inspiration, parliament, separation of powers.
Right, complete overhaul.
Totally. And crucially, this new government opened up access to commoners, guaranteed individual political freedoms. Big stuff. And as part of all that change, Edo gets renamed Tokyo, which means Eastern Capital. It really cemented its new role as the absolute center of Japan's push to modernize.
But modernization isn't always straightforward, is it? Did they face roadblocks?
Oh, definitely. Significant hurdles. It's interesting, actually, the sources say early attempts to redevelop the city were largely, and this is quote, fruitless. A big reason was the really complex, unique land ownership patterns. Hard to get big projects going. There was even a grand master plan by a famous architect in 1889, but mostly it didn't happen. Stayed on paper.
Really?
Well, alongside that, you had unregulated housing development booming between about 1897 and 1915. This led to what the sources call slum-like districts and buildings that damaged the city image. So you had this real tension between the government trying to modernize and, well, real estate interest pushing rapid, maybe uncontrolled growth, even with all the money being spent on modernization efforts.
That's such a critical point. You just raised this balancing act. How do cities manage that tension between growth and planning, especially with competing interests? What did Tokyo learn there?
It's a classic urban dilemma, isn't it? Tokyo's early struggles really show you, I think, that without strong central planning, clear land rules, rapid growth can just get messy. You end up with that slum-like expansion, even when you're aiming high with modernization. It really drove home the need for a more integrated, maybe top-down approach eventually.
Which brings us to resilience. Tokyo's faced just unbelievable devastation, earthquakes, war, yet it always rebuilds, seems to come back stronger. What's the secret to that?
It's incredible, isn't it? That resilience is almost baked into the city's identity, its DNA. Take the Great Kanto earthquake in 1923. The descriptions are harrowing. A 3-day nightmare left most of Tokyo just a pile of debris, led to crime, despair, a really dark time.
Hard to even imagine.
Yeah. And immediately, there was this intense debate among intellectuals about how to rebuild. Some pushed for a fireproof city,
Right.
concrete and steel. Others worried about sticking with wooden buildings, especially for people with less money. Those of more modest means really struggled. Finding housing was tough. Rents shot up.
So it wasn't just about clearing rubble, it was about rethinking the city's fabric and tackling social issues at the same time.
Exactly, a fundamental rethink. And then, not long after World War II, Japan's involvement in the war with China from 1937, then WWII proper, Pearl Harbor, and then the B-29 firebombing raids in 1945. Those raids just demolished and devastated Tokyo, utterly.
The human cost must have been catastrophic.
Immense. Add in the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Across Japan, you're looking at over 350,000 deaths, maybe 400,000 homeless. Just staggering figures. But again, reconstruction started fast. The Reconstruction Commission was set up in 1946. The Tokyo metropolitan government got planning right away.
And was the approach different this time, after everything they'd been through?
Hugely different. This is where it gets really interesting, I think. Post-war reconstruction wasn't like the pre-war efforts. Tokyo is now seen as a special city. It had this powerful metropolitan government fitting with the new constitution's push for democracy, for decentralization, and the focus. It shifted dramatically. It was now about the standard of living and welfare for each citizen, about creating equitable urban space.
Wow, that's a massive philosophical shift.
It really was. Connecting it to the bigger picture, it moved urban planning from just rebuilding structures to building a more just, more resilient city for its people. And this period, of course, is when you see Japan's economic miracle. Post-war rebuilding, helped by foreign capital, American management ideas, Japan becomes this world-class economic power for the late 1960s. And Tokyo, right at the very heart of it all.
So, connecting all that history, what does it mean for Tokyo today? How did it reach this incredible scale, economically and demographically, to become the global city we know?
Well, the growth is just mind-boggling. Population-wise, think about this. Just over 5 million people in 1950. By 1970, over 10 million. By 1980, the capital prefecture alone had topped 13 million. And today, the greater Tokyo area, that's the world's biggest urban agglomeration. Around 27 million people.
27 million. That's almost unimaginable. Does a city that huge hit a limit, a saturation point? Or does Tokyo just keep going?
That's a great question. And one of the really surprising things from the sources is, apparently not. Economically, by 2010, Tokyo's real GDP was over $1 trillion. That's bigger than the entire economy of Canada or South Korea back then, making it effectively the third largest economic entity on the planet.
Just the city itself.
Just the city region.
Yeah.
And the sources explicitly say it does not appear to have reached a reasonable saturation threshold like you see in some other huge world cities. It just keeps expanding its economic influence. And that economy evolved massively, right?
Yeah.
From silk and rice trading way back to modern banks, huge department stores, joint stock companies, these vast money markets developing.
Politically, how did the governance keep up?
Well, there was this really significant event described as an extraordinary political purge of the old pre-war elites by the early 60s. New politicians came in. And by the early 70s, you see the emergence of this effective and coherent bureaucratic social lobbying machine. That sounds complex, but basically it led to what's called a multi-centered form of governance. Power wasn't just top-down. It was spread across different agencies, local bodies, more collaborative. And that effectiveness, that structure, is what made Tokyo comparable, performance-wise, to cities like London, Paris, New York.
Makes sense. That kind of economic boom needs massive infrastructure to support it. How did they manage to build all that out? The trains, the subways?
Oh, absolutely crucial. The infrastructure growth happened in roughly 3 main stages. You had the development of the modern railroad system, really key for business and commuters. Then, post-WWII, there was this purging of old landholders, which actually freed up a lot of space for development. And the nationalization of the railroads helped fuel that westward expansion out from the city center.
Can you give an example of successful planning from that time?
Yeah, a great one is the Shinjuku Nishiguchi project. It was a land readjustment effort. It not only reclaimed the plaza right in front of the station leading to the big Odakyu department store being built there, but it also integrated this huge network of underground pedestrian walkways, made moving around that incredibly busy hub way more efficient. smart, integrated planning.
Okay, so beyond the economics and infrastructure, Tokyo is also this amazing cultural center, right? And a leader in innovation. How does it juggle that cutting edge stuff with its deep traditions? It seems like such a balancing act.
It really does embrace both, almost simultaneously. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
Culturally, you saw this blend of Japanese and Western influences pretty early on. Like in exhibitions back in the 1880s, you get concert halls popping up like Tokyo Kosei and just a huge range of entertainment, Western-style dance halls next to traditional Japanese music venues, even foreign-owned movie theaters early on.
It's pretty amazing how those traditions persist, though, through earthquakes, wars, massive modernization. What does that say about the city's identity, that things like festivals survive?
I think it speaks volumes about Tokyo's unique relationship with, well, permanence and change. Transience, maybe. Despite everything, modernization, disaster traditions stay strong. Those old places of worship, Shinto shrines, Buddhist temples, they're still focal points. Think of the Sanja Matsuri Festival at Asakusa Shrine. Huge parades, celebrations all night. It's vibrant, it's alive.
So it creates this amazing mix.
Exactly, this captivating coexistence of old and new. You see it everywhere. Akihabara, with its crazy tech and subcultures, right alongside Ginza, with its luxury brands next to tiny traditional craft shops. Or even Tokyo Station itself, that beautifully restored, historic red brick facade fronting a hyper-modern transport hub.
So what does that mean practically for a city to embrace transience?
It seems to mean that rebuilding, integrating the new, it isn't just about fixing things. It's almost part of the city's core identity. There's a kind of wisdom there, maybe learned from constantly having to adapt and transform. Impermanence is just part of the deal.
That's a really profound way to think about it. And that adaptability probably fuels its innovation too, right? How is Tokyo using tech now?
Oh, absolutely. It's a massive hub of innovation. And they're tackling some really fundamental challenges. Take the Tokyo Trainable Gardens idea. Sounds a bit odd, maybe. But it's a serious look at urban food self-sufficiency, putting vertical farms, gardens, literally on station platforms.
Wow, really?
Yeah. And think about smart surveillance. They've developed the world's first ultra-high-def 10K 360-degree camera. But it's not just about watching. It uses cloud edge computing for advanced analysis. They see it as part of a system to manage things like commuter flow, linking it to initiatives promoting telework, the work-style revolution.
Using tech to solve real urban problems.
Precisely. And looking forward, they're planning a big international R&D base for the space economy by 2025, plus lots of smart community projects trying to improve quality of life, especially post-pandemic.
What about the people? The demographics must have changed hugely too.
Well, dramatically. You went from pre-modern times, when population growth was actually negative, to positive natural reproduction around 1899, partly thanks to early public health stuff like sanitation, clean water. But then, after the 1970s, fertility rates dropped way down. So now, Tokyo actually relies on an influx of migrant population to maintain its huge size.
And the future, what's the vision? Even bigger.
The vision for New Tokyo by 2050, they projected becoming the world's biggest metropolis, maybe 45 million people. That includes expanding outwards, encompassing areas like Chiba, Kanagawa, Saitama prefectures, more formally into the mega region. It really underlines Tokyo's ambition to be a leading smart city, using this comprehensive, integrated participatory approach to keep managing things sustainably. It kind of goes back to that wisdom, maybe even a double standard the sources mentioned, about how Tokyo didn't just survive disasters like the 1923 quake, but was revived aesthetically or recreatively, always finding a way to rebuild better.
We've really covered a lot of ground here. It's an extraordinary story, isn't it? A city truly defined by constant change, incredible resilience, and this forward-looking spirit that somehow manages to innovate relentlessly while still honoring its past. It keeps rebuilding, rethinking itself.
Indeed. And Tokyo's journey, it's more than just history, isn't it? It feels like a living blueprint. How a city can adapt, rebuild, not just buildings, but its whole philosophy. It offers such powerful lessons for cities everywhere dealing with their own rapid changes and challenges, which really brings us to a final thought, a question for you, the listener, to maybe ponder. How might Tokyo's very unique blend, that mix of deliberate planning and this almost organic, resilient growth from the ground up, how might that offer insights for other cities around the world as they face their own futures of urbanization and environmental change?